Please, don't say out loud, Fred whispered, his voice breaking as his daughter stared up at the waitress. I just don't have enough to pay. The room didn't stop moving, but something in the air did. Laura Huntley froze, the plate still in her hand. In the next few seconds, a decision would be made, one that would quietly change the direction of 3 lives. Sitting at a small table no one else in the diner was paying attention to. The diner was warm, softly lit, the kind of place families stopped into after long days. Fred Smith sat stiffly in his chair, shoulders tense, hands wrapped around a fork he hadn't lifted in minutes. Across from him, his daughter Karen Fred swung her legs under the table, focused entirely on her food, unaware of the storm gathering in her father's chest. Moments like this don't belong to one place. They happen quietly in diners, buses, kitchens, and small corners of everyday life, all over the world. If this story already feels familiar to you, take a second and tell us where you're watching from, because stories like this travel farther than we ever expect. And staying with them, choosing to hear them through, is how we make sure they keep being told. Laura stood beside them in her black vest and name tag, eyes gentle, posture calm, but watchful. Fred glanced down at the table again, as if the numbers might change if he stared long enough. Karen looked between the 2 adults, sensing something she didn't yet have words for. Laura noticed everything. The way Fred avoided eye contact, the way his voice dropped when he spoke, the way shame sat heavier on him than the unpaid bill. What Laura said next wasn't policy. IT was a routine, and it wasn't something Fred could have prepared himself for. To understand why her response mattered so much, you have to know how Fred and Karen ended up at that table on a quiet weekday evening, hoping, just for an hour, that life would feel normal again. Fred opened the check slowly, like the numbers might jump out, and accuse him if he moved too fast. He stared at the total, then at the folded bills in his wallet. Once, twice, then a third time, more carefully than the first 2. His chest tightened. He already knew, but he counted again anyway, hoping he'd miss something. A crumpled bill tucked behind another, a miracle hiding in plain sight. Nothing changed. He was short, a small amount, not enough to justify panic, but enough to crush him. I should have ordered less, he thought. I shouldn't have let her get the chicken. I shouldn't have brought her here at all. Across from him, Karen hummed softly to herself, swinging her legs beneath the table. She was halfway through her meal, focused, content. For a moment, Fred just watched her, this small person who trusted him completely. Daddy, she asked, noticing his stillness. Are you okay? He forced a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, sweetheart. Just tired. She studied him for a second longer than usual, then nodded and went back to eating. But Fred felt it anyway. The quiet awareness children have when something feels off, even if they don't understand why. Laura returned just then, her presence gentle, unhurried. She stopped at the edge of the table and noticed it instantly. The way Fred's shoulders were pulled tight, the way his fingers pressed too hard into the bills, the way he wouldn't look up. She'd seen that look before. Fred swallowed. His heart thudded loud in his ears. He could ask her to give him a minute. He could step outside. He could let the shame pass and figure something out later. Instead, he leaned forward, lowered his voice, and whispered the words he never thought he'd have to say out loud. I don't have enough to pay. The sentence barely made a sound, but it landed heavy. Laura froze, not in anger, not in surprise, in recognition. She watched his hand shake slightly as he folded the money back together, careful, precise, like control was the only thing he had left to hold on to. Moments like this happen every day, quietly without witnesses, and most of the time, no one stays long enough to hear them. Laura took a slow breath, then met his eyes. Give me just a moment, sir, she said softly. She turned and walked away. Fred leaned back in his chair, heart racing, bracing himself for whatever came next. Laura stepped through the swinging door into the kitchen, the noise of clattering plates and murmured orders washing over her like static. For a moment, she just stood there, one hand resting on the counter, breathing in slow, measured pulls, like she used to do when life felt too heavy to hold all at once. The smell of coffee, the low hum of the refrigerator, the familiar rhythm of a place that never stopped moving, even when people inside it did. She looked down at the check in her hand, and suddenly she wasn't here anymore. She was standing in a different place, a smaller diner, years earlier. Her uniform wasn't as neat back then, her shoes worn thin at the soles. She remembered the way the lights flickered above her, how the air felt colder at night. She had been counting money too, once, twice, then a third time, hoping numbers could rearrange themselves as she stared long enough. Her husband had been gone only 6 months. The word widow still felt foreign, heavy on her chest. There had been a child at home, waiting for dinner. A fridge that echoed when she opened it. Bills stacked neatly, because chaos felt worse. She remembered leaning forward at a counter much like this one, whispering to a stranger she didn't know how she'd make it through the week. She remembered the heat in her face, the shame that burned deeper than hunger, the fear of being seen as careless instead of desperate. And she remembered what came next. Not judgment, not lectures, just a quiet voice that said, "It's okay. I've got this." No questions, no conditions. That moment hadn't fixed her life, but it had kept it from collapsing. It had given her space to breathe, to stand up again. Laura had promised herself something that night. Not out loud, just quietly, the way rare promises are made. If I ever get the chance, she had thought, I'll be that person for someone else. Back in the present, she blinked, grounding herself. The kitchen sound sharpened again. Someone laughed near the grill. A cook called out an order number. This wasn't about policy. No manager had been called. No rulebook opened. This was a choice. She glanced toward the dining area, imagining the man sitting stiff in that booth, bracing himself. The little girl watching him with questions in her eyes. Laura wasn't deciding what a waitress should do. She was deciding who she wanted to be. She folded the check once carefully, as if sealing a decision inside it, took one steadying breath, straightened her shoulders. Then she turned and walked back toward the booth. The second stretched thin after Laura walked away. Fred sat still, hands folded tightly on the table, his eyes fixed on a spot just beyond the window. Outside, a car passed. Somewhere near the counter, a glass clinked. Life continued, indifferent to the quiet storm building in his chest. Karen noticed. She always did. She slowed her chewing, her small brows pulling together as she studied him. The easy swing of her legs stopped. "Daddy," she said softly. Fred turned to her, forcing another smile. "Yeah, kiddo?" Her voice dropped, like she was sharing a secret with the table. "Did I do something wrong?" The question hit him harder than any accusation could have. His chest tightened. His throat burned. He shook his head immediately, leaning forward, closer to her. "No, no, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Nothing at all. But you look sad," she said, her eyes searching his face. "Is it because of me?" Fred swallowed. He pressed his palm flat against the table to steady himself. "No," he said, more firmly this time, though his voice trembled. "Never because of you. You're perfect, okay?" She nodded, but uncertainty lingered. Children feel cracks, even when adults try to seal them shut. "I just wanted us to eat here," she said quietly. Like before. Fred closed his eyes for half a second. That was it. Not the money, not the diner, not the fear of being judged. It was the thought of disappointing her, of failing to protect that small bubble of normalcy he worked so hard to keep intact. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "And we did," he said gently. "That's what matters." Behind him, a chair shifted. Laura had returned. She stopped when she heard the tail end of the conversation, the words hanging in the air between father and daughter. She saw the way Fred's shoulders curved inward, like he was trying to shield Karen from something invisible. She saw the child's wide eyes, filled not with blame but with worry. This was an abstract situation anymore. It wasn't about a build-out or a policy. It was about a little girl wondering if love had limits. Laura pulled a chair slightly closer to the table, careful not to startle them. She lowered herself just enough to meet Fred at eye level. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, steady. "Sir," she said gently, leaning in, "may I talk to you for just a moment?" Laura rested her hands lightly on the edge of the table, grounding herself before she spoke. "Sir," she said again, softer now, "tonight you don't owe anything." The words didn't land all at once. They hovered, suspended between them, as if Fred's mind refused to catch them. He shook his head immediately. Too quickly. Too hard. "No," he said, already pushing his chair back a few inches, as if preparing to stand. I can't do that. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll pick up extra hours. I'll bring it all. I swear." Laura didn't flinch. "I know you will," she said calmly. "But that's not what this is." Fred looked up at her then, really looked at her. There was no pity in her face, no superiority, just certainty. "It's not the diner," she continued. "This isn't a policy thing. There's no report, no write-up." She paused and added quieter, "This is me." His mouth opened, then closed again. He glanced at Karen, who was watching the exchange with solemn focus, her small hands folded neatly in her lap. "I can't let you do that," Fred said, his voice cracking despite his effort to keep it steady. "That's not fair." Laura gave a small, sad smile. Fair doesn't always look like even numbers. She leaned in just enough for him to hear her next words without Karen catching every syllable. "Tonight," she said, "you sit with your daughter. You let her finish her meal. You let her feel safe. That's all I'm asking." Fred stared at the table, at the edge of the plate, at the place where his fingers had been counting and recounting the same small bills. His shoulders trembled once. Then again, he pressed his lips together, nodding sharply, like a man refusing to let something escape. But it did anyway. A breath shut it out of him, rough and uneven. He lifted one hand to his face, not to hide tears, but to hold himself together. "I didn't want her to see me like this," he said quietly. "I just wanted one normal night." Laura straightened, giving him space without pulling away. "You gave her that," she said. "You brought her here. You tried. That matters." As Fred struggled to find words, something shifted in the room. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. Some stories don't ask for attention. They ask for understanding. And understanding only comes when someone chooses to stay. Karen slid off her seat before anyone could stop her. She walked around the table and wrapped her arms around Laura's waist, pressing her cheek into the dark fabric of her uniform. "Thank you," she said simply, "for helping my dad." The words were small. The impact wasn't. Laura froze for half a second, then gently rested a hand on Karen's back. She turned her face slightly away, blinking hard, steadying herself before emotion could spill over. Fred watched them, his chest aching in a way that hurt and healed at the same time. For the first time in a long while, shame loosened its grip, and in its place stood something quieter, stronger. Humanity. They sat in the aftermath of the moment, the diner settling back into its quiet rhythm. Plates were cleared, coffee refilled somewhere down the counter. No one stared. No one asked questions. Whatever had happened stayed at the table, held between three people. Fred finally looked up at Laura. His eyes were red but steady now. "Why?" he asked softly. "You didn't have to do that." Laura leaned back against the booth, folding her arms loosely. For a second, she said nothing. Then she exhaled, slow and measured. "Because I know that look," she said. "The one you had when you opened the check." Fred's brow furrowed. "Years ago," she continued, "I was the one sitting where you are." She glanced toward Karen, making sure her tone stayed gentle. "My husband had just passed. Everything came at once. Bills, rent, daycare. All of it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There was a night I walked into a place like this with my son. I counted the money 3 times, just like you did. And when I told the waitress I didn't have enough," Laura smiled faintly. She didn't ask questions. She didn't make a face. She just said, "It's okay. I've got you tonight." Fred listened without interrupting. "That wasn't charity," Laura said. "It was survival. It kept me going when I didn't know how I'd make it to the next week." She looked him directly in the eyes now. "I promised myself that if I ever saw that same moment in someone else, I wouldn't look away. Fred swallowed hard. I don't know how to repay you, he said. Laura shook her head. You don't repay me. She leaned in slightly. You promise me something instead. Fred straightened. Anything. When it's your turn, she said quietly, and you see someone standing where you stood tonight, don't look away. The weight of the request settled in his chest, not as pressure, but as purpose. I promise, he said. There was no hesitation in his voice. Karen reached for his hand, her fingers curling around his. Fred squeezed back, grounding himself in the small warmth of it. Laura smiled, this time fully. They stood a moment later. Fred thanked her again, simpler this time. No explanations, no speeches, just gratitude. As they walked toward the door, the bell chimed softly overhead. Fred didn't look back. He didn't need to. He carried the promise with him, quiet, steady, and ready for the day it would be passed on. Life didn't change all at once. There was no sudden windfall, no dramatic turnaround. The bills didn't disappear, and the mornings didn't get easier overnight. But something shifted, quietly, steadily, like a tide pulling back just enough to reveal solid ground beneath Fred's feet. 2 weeks after the diner, Fred landed a steady job at a regional distribution warehouse. It wasn't glamorous. Early hours, long shifts, sore muscles at the end of the day, but it was consistent. A paycheck that arrived when it was supposed to. Health insurance forms. A schedule he could build a routine around. That alone changed the air in their small apartment. Fred stood a little straighter in the mornings. He stopped triple-checking his phone for missed calls that never came. He slept deeper, even if only for a few hours at a time. Karen noticed everything. She noticed that he hummed again while making breakfast, that he laughed at her stories instead of just smiling through them, that he didn't pause as long at the grocery store when she asked for cereal with the cartoon character on the box. One evening, as they walked home from school, Karen reached for his hand and said, "You're not sad like before." Fred looked down at her, surprised. "I was sad," he asked. She nodded. "But you're better now." He squeezed her hand gently. "We're better," he corrected. At night, when the apartment was quiet, Fred thought about the diner, about Laura's voice, about the way she didn't make him feel small when he already felt invisible. He remembered the promise. Don't look away. Sometimes he caught himself watching strangers a little longer, at the bus stop, at the checkout line, on his lunch break. Not to judge, just to notice. It grounded him. One Friday evening, payday tucked safely into his wallet, Fred stopped in front of the mirror by the door. He checked his collar, smoothed his shirt. Karen waited by the couch, backpack already slung over her shoulder. "Where are we going?" she asked. He smiled. "I owe someone a thank you." She grinned instantly. "The diner lady?" Fred nodded. "Can we eat there?" she asked. He chuckled. "Not tonight." He opened the door, letting the evening air rush in. Tonight wasn't about a meal. It was about coming back whole. The bell above the diner door chimed the same way it had weeks before. Fred noticed it immediately. Karen squeezed his hand as they stepped inside, her eyes already scanning the room. The place looked just as it had that night. Same booths, same quiet hum conversation, same smell of coffee lingering in the air. But everything felt different. This time, Fred's shoulders were relaxed. They spotted Laura near the counter, writing on a small notepad, her hair pulled back the same way. For a brief second, she didn't recognize them. Then her eyes lifted, and she smiled. Not the polite smile of a waitress. The real one. "Well, look who's back," she said, walking over. Karen didn't hesitate. "Hi," she said brightly. Fred cleared his throat. "Hey, we didn't come to eat. I needed to come back." Laura tilted her head, listening. Fred reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills. He placed them on the table between them. Not hurried, not nervous, just deliberate. "I want to pay," he said, "for that night, and tonight too." Laura glanced at the money, then back at him. "You don't owe me," she said gently. "I know," Fred replied, "but I'm not trying to settle a debt. I'm closing a chapter. Laura studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "if that's what you need." Karen looked between them. "Daddy's happy now," she announced. Laura laughed softly. "I can see that." Fred smiled at his daughter, then back at Laura. "You helped me remember who I was," he said, "when I couldn't see it myself." Laura leaned against the booth, folding her arms. "You did the hard part," she said. "You showed up. You didn't quit." She tapped the table lightly with her finger. "And you remember the promise?" Fred nodded. "I do." Laura's smile softened. "Then we're even." They stood there for a moment, no rush to leave, no need to fill the silence. Karen waved as they turned toward the door. "Bye," she said. "Bye, sweetheart," Laura replied. As they stepped outside, Fred felt something settle into place. Not relief, not pride, but balance. He held the door open for Karen, letting her pass through first. The promise was no longer something he carried alone. It was ready. Life kept moving. The warehouse job became routine. Karen grew taller without anyone noticing until one morning Fred realized her jeans were suddenly too short. Laura kept working the diner's evening shifts, pouring coffee, taking orders, listening more than she spoke. None of them became heroes. None of them needed to. But something had changed all the same. Fred noticed it most in small moments. At the grocery store, when a man ahead of him counted coins twice before sliding them across the counter. At the bus stop, when a woman pretended to scroll her phone while wiping her eyes. At work, when a new hire ate lunch alone every day, shoulders tight, eyes lowered. Fred didn't always know what to do. Sometimes all he offered was a smile. Sometimes a quiet word. Sometimes nothing more than patience instead of judgment. But he noticed, and he stayed present. That was the promise, after all. Karen learned by watching. She learned that adults could struggle and still be strong. That helping didn't always mean fixing. That kindness didn't require permission or applause. One afternoon, she came home from school and told Fred about a girl who forgot her lunch. "I shared mine," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Fred smiled, feeling something warm settle in his chest. He didn't praise her loudly. He didn't make it a lesson. He just nodded. "That was good of you." Across town, Laura wiped down the same table she always had. Some nights were quiet. Others were long. There were still moments when she recognized that look in someone's eyes, the hesitation, the embarrassment, the fear of being seen as less. Not every night called for the same response. Not every story ended the same way. But every night, she showed up as herself. And sometimes that was enough. If you stayed this long, it's because you understand something important. That stories like this aren't entertainment. They're reminders. Reminders are behind every receipt, every whispered apology, every lowered gaze. There's a human being trying to hold their life together with dignity. There is no special table in that diner. No reserved seat for the lucky or the strong. There's just the one we all sit at when we choose to see each other. Fred still takes Karen out to eat sometimes. Not always to that diner. But whenever they sit across from each other, whenever she swings her legs and talks too fast and laughs too loud, Fred remembers that night. Not with shame, with gratitude, because in the moment he thought he had failed, someone leaned in instead of looking away, and in doing so, she reminded him of something simple and powerful. We all need help sometimes, and when it's our turn to offer it, the smallest gestures can echo the longest. The diner bell still rings every night, and somewhere between the counter and the booths, kindness keeps finding its way, quietly, steadily, one table at a time. If you stayed until the end, it means you understand something most people rush past, that stories like this aren't just stories. They're reminders of who we can be for each other. If you believe moments like these matter, stay with us. Subscribe, not out of habit, but because you want to keep space for stories that see people clearly. And before you go, tell us where you're listening from, because this table is bigger than one diner, and there's room for all of us.